The dry wind howled across the wasteland, sweeping dust and the scent of burned metal through the ruins. Sergeant Caleb Voss adjusted his visor, scanning the wreckage. The battle had ended hours ago, but the echoes of destruction still lingered. Twisted steel, the charred remains of transport units, and bodies scattered in unnatural stillness. He tapped his comms. Sector 7C is clear. No survivors. Static, then a curt reply. Copy that. Move east. Voss exhaled, stepping over debris. Orders were simple. Sweep, confirm, eliminate. The war against the Zerathans had been brutal, and no human left enemy combatants breathing. But as he moved toward the shattered ridge, something caught his eye, a streak of blue against the rust-colored dirt. A Zerathan. She was slumped against the rock, silver-white hair matted with blood, dark armor cracked. 8 feet tall, built for war, but right now she looked helpless. A broken rifle lay beside her, her hand barely gripping the handle. He tightened his grip on his own weapon. Protocol demanded he finish the job, but she didn't move, didn't even lift her head. He took a cautious step closer. Her breathing was shallow, chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. A deep wound ran along her side, dark ichor seeping into the sand. She was dying. His finger hovered over the trigger. One shot, one order followed. Her golden eyes opened, not with rage, not with fear, just exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, painfully, she released the weapon, let it fall with a dull thud. Her muscles tense, but not in preparation for a strike. She was bracing herself, accepting. Voss hesitated. His comms crackled again. Voss, report. His throat was dry. His mind screamed at him to end it, but something gnawed at the edge of his instincts. This wasn't how enemies acted. The story said they fought to the last breath. That surrender wasn't in their nature. He made his choice. Fingers moving quickly, he pulled a small med pack from his belt, dropped to one knee, and pressed it against the wound. The alien flinched, a sharp intake of breath. But she didn't stop him. Blood stained his gloves. He ignored it, focusing on sealing the injury with what little resources he had. Her gaze never left him. Voss! The voice in his earpiece was growing irritated. He grabbed his rifle, stood, and pressed his comms. No hostiles, just wreckage. A pause. Copy that. Keep moving. The line cut. Voss exhaled, glancing back down at her. She hadn't moved, but something in her expression had shifted. He wasn't sure what it meant. He had just made an enemy's survival his responsibility. Footsteps. His head snapped up. They were close. His squad. Heart pounding. He looked at the Zerathan, then at the rocks behind her. A small crevice. Just wide enough. Move. He kept his voice low, firm. She blinked. More footsteps. He grabbed her arm. She tensed but didn't resist as he pulled her toward the shadows. Each step was agony for her. He could feel her muscles trembling with the effort. The voices were clearer now. Nothing left but scraps. Doubt anything's alive out here. Voss pressed against the rock, rifle raised. If they saw her, it was over. Boots crunched over debris, stopping just feet away. Another voice. Commands ordering a full sweep before we head back. Kill anything breathing. A beat of silence. Then retreating steps. Voss didn't move until the sounds faded completely. Beside him, the Zerathan exhaled shakily. He turned to her. She was watching him again. He didn't know what she saw in his face. But whatever it was, she nodded. The cave was cold, the air thick with dust and silence. Caleb Voss crouched near the entrance, rifle balanced on his knee. Outside, the wind howled, masking distant voices. His squad had moved on, but he knew better than to assume they were gone for good. Behind him, the Zerathan shifted, her breathing still labored. He glanced back. Her wound was sealed, but she was in no condition to move. She watched him with those piercing golden eyes, unreadable but alert. His grip tightened on his weapon. He had risked everything to keep her alive. Now came the part he hadn't thought through. What next? His rations were limited. Supplies were meant for soldiers, not 8-foot aliens. He pulled a protein bar from his pack, broke it in half, and tossed a piece her way. She caught it, but didn't eat, just stared at it, then at him. "It's food," he muttered, as if that meant anything to her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slow and deliberate, she tore off a piece and chewed. A step forward, small but something. He let the silence stretch, watching her, studying. Every story he'd heard said Zirathans were ruthless killers, but she hadn't attacked him, hadn't called for her people. And now she sat across from him, eating human rations like a soldier on break. She tapped her chest suddenly, a firm, deliberate motion. "Scylla." Voss blinked. It took him a second to realize what she meant. Her name. She was giving him her name. He hesitated before tapping his own chest. "Voss." Her head tilted slightly, processing. Then she repeated it, voice rough but clear. "Voss." He exhaled, shaking his head. This was insane. He was sitting in a cave with an enemy, exchanging names like it meant something. Outside movement. He froze. She did too. A Zirathan patrol. Close. Searching. Voss motioned for her to stay quiet. She didn't need to be told. The voices were sharp, alien. He understood none of it, but their intent was clear. They were looking for her. Her muscles tensed, fingers twitching toward the blade strapped to her leg. But she didn't move. Voss's pulse hammered. If they found them, there was no coming back from this. A long pause. Then, footsteps fading. Gone. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. Scylla remained still, eyes locked on the cave entrance. He turned to her. "They were looking for you." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. She hadn't called for them. Hadn't made a sound. And that meant one thing. She wasn't just running from the humans. She was running from her own people. Silence stretched between them, heavy with questions he wasn't sure he wanted the answers to. She shifted, fingers brushing over the cracked plating of her armor. Then, without a word, she reached down and unfastened a small, circular emblem from her shoulder. She held it out to him. He frowned. "What is this?" Still no words, but she pressed it into his hand, closing his fingers around it. A gift, a sign, trust. He stared at her, at the silent understanding forming between them. Whatever had brought them here, whatever war had made them enemies, at this moment, none of it mattered. Days passed in uneasy silence. The desert remained ruthless, the cave offering only temporary shelter. Voss rationed supplies, but it wasn't enough. They needed a plan. Staying put meant slow death. Moving meant exposure. Scylla recovered faster than he expected. Her wounds were deep, but Zirathan resilience was something to fear. Even now, she moved with quiet strength, watching him as he calculated their next move. Communication was still a struggle, but they made do. Gestures, short words. She was learning faster than he was. Her voice remained rough, but her intent was clear. Survival. Voss sat across from her, drawing a crude map in the dirt. The human outpost was a day's march north. Suicide. The Zirathan lines were further east. Just as bad. That left one option, the dead zone. No man's land. No patrols, no life. Just scorched earth and forgotten wreckage. He pointed. "We go here." Silas studied the map, then met his gaze. "Why?" He tapped his chest. "They think I'm dead. You they're hunting." She nodded, understanding. Then she picked up a rock and carved something into the dirt. A shape, a symbol. Not human, not Zirathan. Voss frowned. "What is that?" She hesitated, then tapped the emblem she had given him. Realization hit like a punch to the gut. That wasn't just a token. It was a mark, a faction. She wasn't just a soldier. She was something else. Voss inhaled sharply. "You're a deserter." Her expression remained unreadable, but she didn't deny it. Everything made sense now. The way she hadn't called for her people. The way they had hunted her like prey. She wasn't just a rogue warrior. She was a traitor. To them, the silence stretched between them, heavier than before. Then Voss's comms crackled. A transmission. Scrambled, but clear enough. Engagement near Outpost 17, Resistance eliminated. Final sweep in 12 hours. His blood ran cold. They weren't just hunting stragglers. They were wiping the area clean. Anyone left behind, human or Zirathan, was getting erased. Sila's gaze darkened. She understood, even without knowing the words. They had no time. Voss gritted his teeth, adjusting his gear. They had to move now. She mirrored his actions, tightening the straps on her damaged armor. Despite everything, she still carried herself like a warrior. They weren't allies. Not yet, but they weren't enemies anymore. As they stepped out of the cave, leaving behind the last traces of the war, they had once fought on opposite sides. Voss knew one thing. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about something much bigger. The desert stretched endlessly, a wasteland of forgotten battles and scorched ruins. Every step was a risk. The patrols were getting closer. The air hummed with distant engines, scanning for anything left alive. Voss moved first, rifle ready. Scylla followed, her movements precise despite her injuries. Neither spoke. Words weren't needed. They had a destination, and every second wasted was a step closer to death. A wreckage site loomed ahead, an old battlefield long abandoned, twisted metal, half buried in the sand. It was their best chance for cover. Voss motioned forward, quickening his pace. Then he stopped. Footprints. Fresh. Scylla saw them too. She crouched low, golden eyes sharp. Not human. Zirathan. Voss scanned the horizon, heart pounding. A mistake here meant death. They needed a way around. Too late. Movement. Figures emerging from the wreckage. 3. Heavily armed. Searching. Scylla tensed, hand drifting to her blade. Voss clenched his jaw. If they fought, it would draw attention. If they ran, they wouldn't get far. Then one of the Zirathans spotted them, a sharp bark in their language. Weapons raised. Scylla stepped forward. Voss almost stopped her. Almost. But he saw the shift in her stance. The way she squared her shoulders, standing tall despite her wounds. She wasn't running. She was claiming authority. The lead Zirathan hesitated, studying her. Recognition flickered across his face. A moment stretched between them. Then he spoke. Scylla responded, her voice steady, commanding. Voss didn't understand a word, but he understood power. The Zirathan warrior before them was strong, but Scylla, she was something else. Even wounded, even hunted, she stood as if she still belonged to something greater. The warrior's grip on his weapon faltered. Doubt crept into his stance. Then Scylla did something unexpected. She pointed at Voss. The warriors tensed. Voss's fingers twitched on the trigger. A few words passed between them. The leader's expression hardened. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. The other two followed. Voss exhaled, unsure what had just happened. But he didn't question it. Scylla had won them a chance. Without another word, they moved. The warriors let them pass. Voss glanced back once. They were still watching, but they did nothing. As the wreckage disappeared behind them, he turned to Scylla. What did you say to them? She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, I told them you were mine. He frowned. What does that mean? She didn't look at him, just kept walking. Voss didn't press. Because for the first time since this all started, he realized something. This wasn't just about survival. Not anymore. This was something much bigger. Something that could change everything. And whether he liked it or not, he was part of it now.